William vows it will be the last time they speak as openly and as publicly about their mother again.
A plain black cab pulled up to the rear gates of Kensington Palace on a rainy Thursday afternoon, triggering a chain of events that has left the royal household in a state of absolute panic. Inside that vehicle was an elderly former staff member carrying a worn blue leather notebook that had been missing since 1997. It was the unredacted private journal of Princess Diana. Prince William instantly broke all protocol, canceled his meetings, and ordered his security team to lock down his private study. What lay written inside those yellowed pages would not only shatter 30 years of official palace history, but also force an urgent, late-night confrontation between the future king and his father. A cryptic message from the past. At the palace gates, the wind drove a cold, steady rain across the gardens of Kensington Palace. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon in November. Prince William sat at his desk in his private apartment, reviewing a stack of paperwork for an upcoming charity gala. His chief of staff, Jean-Christophe Gray, stood near the door with a digital tablet. The desk phone buzzed with an urgent internal ring. William picked up the receiver. The security sergeant at the palace's rear gatehouse sounded incredibly tense. He apologized for the interruption, but stated that an elderly woman had just arrived in a standard London taxi. She had no official appointment and lacked a modern palace security pass. The guards had initially ordered the driver to turn the vehicle around. The woman had then rolled down her window and handed a small, water-stained envelope to the sergeant. She told him to deliver it directly to the Prince of Wales. She refused to leave the checkpoint until she received an answer. William asked what was written on the envelope. The sergeant explained that the outside was completely blank. Inside sat a single piece of old cream stationery. Written across the center was a single word: socks. William froze at his desk. He dropped his pen onto the blotter. That word was not a random note. It was the private hidden nickname of a pet rabbit he had kept during his childhood at Highgrove House in the early 90s. Only his mother, Princess Diana, and a handful of her most trusted personal staff had ever known that name. It was never published in any biography or newspaper article. He looked up at his chief of staff and ordered him to cancel the remaining afternoon meetings. He told the gatehouse sergeant to allow the taxi through the perimeter wall immediately. He specified that the woman should be escorted directly to his private drawing room through the staff entrance to avoid the cameras of the tourists in the public courtyard. Jean-Christophe tried to protest. He argued that allowing an unvetted stranger into the private apartments violated every standard protection protocol. He insisted that the security team should screen the woman and her belongings in the lower basement offices first. William ignored the warning. He stood up from his chair and walked toward the drawing room. He stated that he knew exactly who was in that taxi. 5 minutes later, the drawing room door opened. A frail woman in a heavy wool coat stepped inside, carrying a small cardboard parcel wrapped in brown butcher paper. This was Margaret Henderson. She had served as a senior wardrobe assistant to Princess Diana until her sudden departure from the royal household in 1996. She had completely disappeared from public life after the divorce, moving to a quiet cottage in Devon. Margaret looked frail, but her eyes were entirely sharp. She did not curtsy or offer a formal royal greeting. She walked over to the tea table and set the heavy parcel down on the polished wood. She looked at William, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. She stated that she had kept a sacred promise for exactly 30 years. She explained that on the night Diana moved her personal belongings out of the palace following the final legal settlement, the princess had handed her this parcel. Diana had explicitly commanded her to hide the contents in a safe place outside of London. Margaret had placed the package inside a private safety deposit box at a bank in Exeter. Diana's instructions were absolute. The parcel was only to be returned to her eldest son when he reached a specific position of authority within the family, and only if she felt the institution was attempting to rewrite the history of those difficult years. William looked down at the brown paper packaging. The butcher paper was brittle with age, secured by a length of old hemp twine. He asked Margaret why she had chosen this specific week to make the journey to London. The former assistant answered that she had been watching the recent palace announcements regarding the family archives. She had learned that the Central Treasury was preparing to digitize and edit all correspondence from the 90s for a new public history project. She knew that if the official handlers controlled the narrative, the truth about Diana's final years would be buried forever. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small silver fountain pen. She laid it on top of the brown paper. She stated that this pen had been left to William in his mother's original property list, but it had been held in a storage vault at Windsor for decades. Margaret had quietly retrieved it from the wardrobe office before she resigned. William picked up the silver pen. He turned it over in his hand, his thumb catching on a tiny seam near the top of the cap. He pulled the cap apart, revealing a hollow chamber inside the metal casing. Tucked deep into the silver barrel sat a tiny, flat brass key. It was the key to a traditional lock. He looked back at the parcel on the table and felt a sudden, heavy wave of realization. The mystery of his mother's missing thoughts was sitting right in front of him, and the palace handlers had no idea it had just entered the building. The blue leather notebook on the tea table. William used a pair of silver desk scissors to snip the old hemp twine. The brown butcher paper crackled as he unfolded the layers. Inside sat a thick notebook bound in worn sky blue calfskin leather. The gold tooling along the edges was severely tarnished. A small brass padlock held the metal clasp firmly shut. Margaret Henderson stood perfectly still by the cold fireplace. She watched as William took the tiny brass key from the hollow barrel of the silver pen. He inserted it into the lock mechanism. The tiny tumbler turned with a distinct, metallic click. The padlock popped open. William lifted the leather cover. A faint scent drifted up from the thick cream pages. It was a subtle mix of sandalwood and white gardenias, the exact custom fragrance Diana always ordered from her perfumer in Paris. The handwriting on the first page was instantly familiar. The letters were large, rounded, and written in her signature blue ink. The first entry was dated March 14th, 1995. Diana had written the words while staying at Althorpe, her family's ancestral estate. She wrote about her growing isolation within the London palaces. She detailed her suspicion that her private telephone lines were being routed through a monitoring station in Cheltenham. William skimmed his eyes down the page. His mother had listed the exact dates and times when she noticed strange clicking sounds on her bedroom phone line. She had even recorded the license plate numbers of 2 unmarked vehicles that constantly parked outside her therapist's office in Knightsbridge. Margaret took a step toward the tea table. She stated that she had personally witnessed the installation of the listening devices. She revealed that a team of technicians posing as telephone repairmen had entered the apartments under a false maintenance order signed by the Lord Chamberlain. William felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The rumors of surveillance had always been dismissed by palace officials as mere paranoia, but this journal contained concrete, physical proof. It listed the specific names of 3 senior courtiers who had authorized the interception of her private mail. He flipped toward the middle of the notebook, where the entries from 1996 began. This section covered the final, brutal months of the divorce negotiations. Diana's tone in these pages changed completely. The writing looked hurried, the ink smudging where her hand had pressed hard against the vellum. She detailed a private meeting that took place in a windowless basement room at St. James's Palace. 2 senior lawyers representing the Crown estate had handed her a binding financial settlement document. They told her that if she did not sign the contract within 24 hours, her access to her children would be legally restricted under an ancient royal prerogative. William stopped reading. He looked up at Margaret, his face tight with anger. He asked if his mother had ever mentioned this specific threat to her legal team. The former assistant shook her head slowly. She explained that Diana was completely terrified of losing her sons. The lawyers had warned her that the institution would use the tabloid press to paint her as emotionally unstable if she fought the clause in the public courts. She signed the paperwork in total secret, without her personal solicitor present in the room. But the journal revealed a final, brilliant counter-strategy. On the very next page, Diana had written a formal, handwritten codicil to her private will. She stated that because the financial settlement was signed under physical and emotional duress, she was using her personal family rights to nullify the asset distribution clauses. She explicitly stated that 50% of her private jewelry collection and her personal diaries were to bypass the royal trustees entirely. They were to be held in a private, independent trust managed by her brother, Earl Spencer. The purpose was to ensure that her sons would inherit her unredacted history when they turned 30. William realized the massive legal implications of this entry. The current palace administration had spent decades integrating Diana's personal property into the royal collection. Some of those exact jewels were currently being worn by senior royals at state functions. If this handwritten codicil was legally binding, the palace had been holding stolen property for 30 years. He stood up from the armchair, carrying the blue notebook over to his large writing desk. He told Margaret that she needed to remain at Kensington Palace for her own protection. He knew that once the security team realized what she had delivered, the palace machine would move instantly to seize the book. He pressed a button on his desk terminal to page his personal security officer. He gave a direct order to place Margaret in one of the private guest suites in the clock tower wing. He specified that her name must not be entered into the palace visitor logbook. As Margaret walked out of the drawing room with the guard, William sat down at his desk. He stared at the blue ink on the yellowed pages. He pulled his secure phone toward him. He needed to make a call to a specific legal advisor in London who operated completely outside the royal household network. The battle for his mother's true legacy was no longer a matter of history. It was a modern legal crisis that was about to break wide open, redacting the truth behind the 1996 divorce. A heavy metallic thud vibrated through the floorboards of the palace basement. Just 20 minutes after the taxi departed, a tactical squad from the Royals Protection Unit marched down the lower corridor of Kensington Palace. They carried an official security override order stamped by the Home Office. They bypassed the standard security guards and went straight to the digital archive room. Inside that room, 3 data technicians were actively syncing the historical files for the upcoming Royal History Project. The squad leader did not explain the intrusion. He pulled a master kill switch handle located behind the main server rack, instantly cutting the power to the entire digital system. The terminal monitors blinked out, leaving the room in darkness. The electronic archive was officially locked down to prevent any scanning of the newly returned papers. The palace establishment had tracked the taxi's registration through the London traffic camera network. They knew Margaret Henderson had visited the Prince of Wales, and they knew exactly what she had carried. Upstairs in his private study, William heard the distant alarm ring on his desk console. The digital connection to the main palace library had failed completely. He did not call the IT department. He knew the network crash was a deliberate defensive maneuver by the king's advisors. He sat down with a legal ledger and a secure satellite phone. He bypassed the main switchboard at Clarence House and dialed a private, unlisted number that connected directly to a high-ranking family attorney in the city, Sir Andrew Rogers. Andrew had managed Diana's independent estate affairs during the final months of her life. He was now fully retired and living in Surrey. He picked up the telephone on the 3rd ring, his voice sounding raspy but entirely alert. William told him that he was holding the blue calfskin notebook from 1995. He read the exact text of the handwritten codicil regarding the private trust and the jewel collection. Andrew let out a long, heavy breath over the line. He stated that he had been waiting for this phone call for 30 years. He revealed that on the afternoon of August 28, 1996, Diana had visited his private office in London. She was completely distraught, claiming that a senior courtier had threatened to block her travel rights if she did not hand over her private papers. Andrew had advised her that a handwritten codicil, if witnessed correctly by a non-family member, would completely supersede the official Crown divorce settlement. He confirmed that he had personally signed the back of that parchment page as a legal witness, using his private seal. This confirmation changed everything for William. It meant the document was not a sentimental diary. It was an active, legally binding testamentary instrument. The modern palace had no legal right to hold his mother's personal effects, her private letters, or the historic tiaras currently kept in the Windsor vault. Suddenly, a loud knock rattled the heavy oak door of William's study. His chief of staff, Jean-Christophe Gray, entered the room without waiting for permission. His face looked completely flush. He held an official diplomatic envelope that had just been delivered by a motorcycle courier from Buckingham Palace. Jean-Christophe stated that the king's private secretary had issued an immediate executive summons. The order demanded that William surrender the blue leather notebook to the royal archivist for immediate authentication under the Public Records Act. The courier was instructed to wait in the courtyard until the package was handed over. William stood up from his desk and walked over to the tall sash window. He looked down into the rainy courtyard. The motorcycle courier sat idling near the archway, his high-visibility jacket glowing under the street lamps. 2 plainclothes protection officers stood nearby, watching the entrance to the staircase. William turned back to his chief of staff. He gave a flat, uncompromising command. He ordered him to send the courier back to London empty-handed. He stated that the notebook was a private inheritance, not a state record, and it would remain in his personal custody. Jean-Christophe warned him that this refusal would trigger an immediate constitutional standoff with King Charles. He argued that the monarch had the legal right to seize any historical document that threatened the public stability of the crown. William picked up the blue notebook from his desk and slid it into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. He told his chief of staff that he was going to handle his father face to face. He walked out of the study and headed down the grand staircase toward the waiting Range Rover. The time for private legal arguments was over. The real battle for his mother's legacy was moving directly to the king's private residence. The urgent call to the king's private study. The black vehicle pulled up to the garden entrance of Clarence House at exactly 6 o'clock. William stepped out into the rain, clutching his leather briefcase tightly under his arm. He bypassed the main reception desk and took the private lift to the first floor. He did not ask the attending page to announce his arrival. He pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of his father's private study himself. King Charles sat at his desk, reading a confidential government dispatch under a brass green-shaded lamp. Standing near the fireplace was Sir Clive Alderton, holding a stack of printing paper. The room smelled of old cigars and linseed oil. Both men looked up in total surprise as William stepped onto the Persian rug. The king closed his leather folder. He asked his son why he had ignored the executive courier at Kensington Palace. He stated that the Royal Archives had a statutory duty to examine all historical recovery documents immediately. His voice sounded thin and strained. William set his briefcase down on the large circular table in the center of the room. He snapped open the brass locks and pulled out the blue calfskin notebook. He did not hand it to his father. He laid it flat on the wood, keeping his hand firmly on the cover. He stated that this book was a private testamentary instrument, not an archival record. Clive took a step forward, his hand reaching out toward the table. He argued that under the Public Records Act, any document written by a senior member of the family within a royal palace belonged technically to the crown trustees. He warned that keeping the journal hidden would look like an admission of a legal breach if the story leaked to the press. William ordered the secretary to step back. He told Clive that he knew about the digital archive shutdown in the basement. He revealed that he had already spoken directly with Sir Andrew Rogers in Surrey. He confirmed that the 1996 codicil was fully witnessed and legally valid. Charles looked at his secretary, then looked back at his son. He rubbed his eyes with his fingers. He ordered Clive to leave the room and close the door. The secretary hesitated for a second, then gathered his papers and exited, clicking the lock behind him. The study became remarkably quiet, save for the crackle of the wood fire. Charles stood up from his desk and walked over to the drinks tray. He poured himself a glass of water. He stated that the 1996 divorce negotiations were handled by a special committee of the government to prevent a total collapse of public confidence in the monarchy. William countered that the committee had used illegal surveillance and personal threats to force their mother into a corner. He pointed to a specific paragraph in the Blue Journal where Diana described the basement meeting at St. James's Palace. He read the line aloud, detailing how the crown lawyers had threatened to use the ancient prerogative to restrict her access to her children. Charles looked out the window into the London night. He did not deny the threat. He muttered that the court officials at the time were operating under an extreme state of panic. The media war had reached a point where the stability of the entire state was being questioned by international allies. He claimed that mistakes were made by individual courtiers who are no longer alive. William refused to accept the excuse. He stated that the modern palace was still actively benefiting from those mistakes. He brought up the list of private Spencer Trust jewels that were currently kept in the vault at Windsor Castle. According to the codicil, those items should have passed directly to Diana's brother 30 years ago. He gave his father a direct choice. The palace could allow an independent legal team to verify the codicil and restore the private trust assets quietly, or William would hand the physical journal over to the Spencer family lawyers the following morning. If the story hit the High Court, the institutional cover-up would be exposed on the front page of every global newspaper. Charles turned away from the window. He looked at the blue notebook on the table. He admitted that a public court battle over Diana's private diary would completely destroy the remaining credibility of his own reign. The crown was already facing intense scrutiny over its finances and modern family splits. He proposed a temporary freeze. He asked William to leave the notebook in a secure safe at Clarence House for 48 hours, while the Crown solicitors reviewed the legal validity of the witness signature. He promised that no archivists would touch the pages during that time. William refused to leave the book behind. He picked up the blue calfskin journals and placed it back into his briefcase. He stated that he would keep the physical evidence in his own possession at Kensington Palace. He gave his father until midnight to confirm whether the palace would cooperate with the independent trust verification. He snapped the briefcase shut and walked out of the study, leaving the king alone in the dim light of the green lamp. An unexpected alliance. Across the Atlantic, William arrived back at Kensington Palace just after 8 o'clock in the evening. The rain had cleared, leaving the brick courtyards damp and reflecting the amber security lights. He walked straight to his private study, bypassed his administrative staff, and locked the door from the inside. He set his briefcase on the desk and pulled out the blue calfskin notebook. He realized he could no longer carry this historical weight alone. The legal documents inside did not just belong to him. They belonged equally to his younger brother. He picked up his secure mobile phone and dialed a private, encrypted number that bypassed the standard international cellular hubs. The call connected directly to a residential line in Montecito. The time in California was midday. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, guarded voice answered the call. It was Prince Harry. Harry sounded instantly defensive, asking why his brother was calling him on a private line without scheduling the conversation through their respective legal representatives. He noted that their last communication regarding family matters had ended in complete administrative gridlock. William did not waste time with formal greetings or family small talk. He front-loaded the situation. He told Harry that he was currently sitting at his desk holding their mother's unredacted private journal from 1995. He explained that Margaret Henderson had delivered the parcel to the palace gates just hours earlier. The line went completely silent for several seconds. Harry's tone changed instantly from anger to pure disbelief. He asked if the brass padlock on the clasp was still intact. William confirmed that it was, and explained how he had used the tiny key hidden inside the silver fountain pen from the Windsor vault to open it. William turned on his desk terminal and activated a secure, end-to-end encrypted document camera. He laid the blue notebook beneath the lens and flipped to the 1996 section. He scanned the pages in real time, allowing the high-resolution feed to transmit directly to Harry's private tablet across the Atlantic. Harry read the handwritten pages silently. William could hear his brother's heavy breathing over the audio link as he scrolled past the entries describing the windowless basement meeting at St. James's Palace. The text clearly outlined how the Crown lawyers had used the threat of restricted access to the children to force Diana's signature on the divorce settlement. Harry spoke with a sharp, raw anger. He stated that this document proved every single claim he had made regarding the institutional manipulation of their mother's public image. He argued that the palace machine had spent decades gaslighting the public into believing Diana was simply unstable, while the archives proved she was operating under severe emotional duress. He immediately demanded that the digital files be leaked to the global press corps to expose the historical cover-up once and for all. He argued that the public deserved to know the absolute truth about the methods used by the courtiers during the 90s. William urged his brother to pause and look at the bigger picture. He flipped the page to show the formal handwritten codicil witnessed by Sir Andrew Rogers. He explained that, because the document was a valid testamentary instrument, they held a far more powerful weapon than a simple media scandal. They held absolute legal leverage over the current administration. He explained that if they used the journal to launch a public media war, the palace lawyers would tie the book up in the copyright courts for a decade, branding it a stolen state artifact. But if the two brothers stood together as joint trustees of the private Spencer Trust, they could legally demand the immediate return of their mother's assets without ever filing a public lawsuit. This strategic shift made Harry stop. He realized that for the first time in 10 years, his goals aligned perfectly with his brother's position. By acting together as co-executors of their mother's true will, they could force King Charles and his advisors to capitulate to their demands behind closed doors. Harry agreed to the joint strategy under one absolute condition. He demanded that the original physical notebook remain outside the custody of the royal archives. He insisted that the book be moved to a neutral location, suggesting a secure vault at the Althorpe estate under the direct care of their uncle, Earl Spencer. William accepted the condition without hesitation. He He stated that he had already refused his father's request to leave the book at Clarence House. The two brothers spent the next hour reviewing the specific lists of family jewels and personal letters that fell under the jurisdiction of the codicil. The shared memory of their mother had created an unexpected, powerful bridge across the ocean, completely dismantling years of public estrangement in the span of a single private phone call. A new shift in the palace power dynamic. The clock in the Kensington Palace courtyard struck 11 as William completed the final page scan. The secure link to Montecito remained active. Harry's face on the monitor looked remarkably focused. The decades of media static and public sparring between the brothers seemed to evaporate. They had unified around a single, undeniable truth written in their mother's hand. William downloaded the digital confirmation sheet from the encrypted terminal. He signed his name at the bottom as co-trustee of the Spencer private estate. He slid the document under the camera lens. Harry watched the signature appear on his screen, then clicked a digital stylus to add his own verified signature to the file. The legal document was officially executed. With the signed paper in hand, William placed his final call of the night to Clarence House. He skipped Sir Clive Alderton entirely, using the direct emergency patch line to the King's bedside terminal. Charles answered within seconds. His voice sounded thin, gravelly, and heavy, with the realization that the midnight deadline had arrived. William did not use formal preambles. He stated clearly that he was speaking on behalf of both himself and his brother. He confirmed that Harry had reviewed every page of the 1995 journal. He stated that they had officially registered the handwritten codicil with an independent probate firm in London, bypassing the Crown solicitors completely. The King did not speak for a long time. The audio connection picked up only the faint, rhythmic ticking of a clock in his London bedroom. Charles finally asked what terms his sons were demanding to prevent a public filing in the High Court. William laid out the joint ultimatum. First, the Royal Archives must permanently cease any attempt to digitize or edit Princess Diana's personal correspondence from the 90s for the upcoming Public History Project. The narrative of her life would remain untouched by institutional handlers. Second, the historic jewel collection listed in the codicil, currently stored in the Windsor Vault, must be quietly transferred back to the Spencer estate custody within 30 days. Charles tried to protest the jewel transfer. He muttered that removing prominent tiaras from the official collection would be noticed by sharp-eyed fashion reporters at the next state banquet. It would trigger immediate public speculation about an internal family asset split. William countered his father's objection instantly. He suggested that the palace press office could easily attribute the absence of the pieces to a routine long-term conservation and cleaning schedule. He reminded his father that a few speculative articles about historic jewelry were nothing compared to the absolute devastation of a public trial exposing the 1996 surveillance logs. The King realized he had no remaining cards to play. His son held the physical book. His younger son held the media leverage across the Atlantic. And the legal witness in Surrey was entirely prepared to validate the signature under oath. Charles gave his soft, verbal consent to the terms. He stated that the archive team would receive the standalone directive before the start of business the following morning. The call disconnected with a soft click. William leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his eyes. He looked at the high-definition monitor and gave a brief nod to his brother. Harry returned the gesture, his expression relaxing for the first time in years. He told William that their mother had finally won her final legal argument against the palace machine. The video feed cut out, leaving the study in silence. The next morning, the physical reality of the agreement was put into motion. A private, unmarked security van arrived at the rear entrance of Kensington Palace. Margaret Henderson was quietly checked out of her guest suite, her name entirely missing from any official gate log. She was given a secure escort back to her quiet cottage in Devon, her sacred 30-year promise finally fulfilled. William placed the blue calfskin notebook inside a heavy iron lockbox. He did not leave it at Kensington Palace. He personally drove the container down to the Althorpe estate in Northamptonshire, handing the physical keys directly to his uncle, Earl Spencer. The diary was placed in a secure underground vault beneath the ancestral home, far out of reach of any London politicians or palace courtiers. The institution had survived another massive, invisible crisis behind closed doors. The public would continue to watch the family attend formal engagements and smile for the television cameras, completely unaware that a worn notebook had just rewritten the inner power structure of the crown. William returned to his duties with a completely new understanding of his position. He was no longer just the heir to the throne, he was the ultimate keeper of his mother's truth, and the palace machine would never be able to manipulate him again. The incredible discovery of Princess Diana's unredacted private journal proves that the most powerful secrets of the British royal family are often hidden right in plain sight. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think Prince William and Prince Harry made the right decision by standing together to force King Charles into a secret compromise? Or should the absolute truth about the 1996 divorce have been shared with the entire world? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on the hidden legal battles and historical secrets shifting the modern monarchy, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and turn on all your notifications so you never miss our next exclusive report.